Hey peeps. Oh gosh, I had a good time. I ran my first professional DM campaign on Tuesday. Second edition campaign. Got 5 new players, people I'd never met before, just randomly signed up and joined, and I had the best time. It was really great. These folks, I had the evening planned, right? First was going to be a quick tutorial, which would give people some idea how the movement worked. Then we would do a quick combat, and we would determine how the interface, the Fantasy Grounds interface worked, and we would work through that. Then we'd have kind of a final kind of encounter where the players could practice maneuvering and attacking, and I had a plan. And of course, these guys just steamrolled my plan. It was awesome. It took me right off the rails. Like the moment we started playing, which is, anyone who's been following me for a while, that's my favorite kind of game. So now the campaign has started. Apparently, my tutorial is not wanted or needed, and we have now begun the actual game. And I am having a great time. They're all signed up for next week, so I'm assuming they had a good time too. So to you guys who joined me on Tuesday, thanks. Thanks for a great night. And my wife is thrilled because, she said you can't play any more dungeons. You can't play any more Dungeons and Dragons unless you get paid, and I got paid. It was awesome. So I had a great time. But that is obviously. There is still one space available, so I'll put the link down there. There's still 1 seat left in the campaign, so if you want to join us, we play Tuesday nights at 9:00. And yeah, we're having a great time. It's 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We're playing Fantasy Grounds. I have an ultimate license, so it won't cost any more than the ticket. Anyway, today we want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons that's better than Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I know a lot of the newer D&D players have a hard time accepting that there's a Dungeons and Dragons out there that's better than what they play, because it's all they've ever played. And you know what? If you don't feel like stretching your legs, if you don't want to learn anything new, if you don't want to understand the history of the game, if you don't want to play a better version of the game, then by all means, play the game you love, right? I do still recommend strongly don't let them chump you into this new tabletop of theirs. Don't let them chump you into 6th edition, and it is a new edition. Okay, we've seen enough of the game now. I was wrong. I said, look, when they first roll the game out, it's going to be basically compatible with 5th edition. It's just going to need, a couple of minor tweaks here. No, from what they've showed us, this is a new edition. This is a new game. Your characters will not really be compatible with the new system. Your books will not really be compatible with the new system. It's going to take a lot of work to make your game work in 6th edition. So it was a lie from the start, which surprised me. I thought they were going to make it compatible with 5th edition to start, and then use their subscription service that they've been talking about to kind of incrementally change the rules and kind of slip it slowly into 6th edition. But it does not look like that's what they're doing. It really does look like they are coming up with a new edition. And everyone's saying, oh, but it's more like a 5.5. But again, no. Okay. First of all, it's not a 5.5. The reason 3.5 happened was because 3 was broken. Let's not fool around with what happened with 3.5. So the only changes they really made to 3.5 were the changes they had to make because 3 was a broken system. It wasn't properly play tested. It was released before it was ready. So 3.5 is really the game that 3.0 should have been when it was released. Okay, that's not what's happening here. In fact, from what I've seen, they're breaking the game even more, and 5th edition is already pretty broken. So, I do recommend staying away from 6th edition. But there's a lot of D&D out there that's way better than 5th edition, and that's what we're going to talk about. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is older versions of D&D, okay? because the older versions of D&D were better than 5th edition. Now, I've got a whole video about that. I'll put a card up at the end of this video if you want to watch it, but 5th edition is not the best version of D&D. It's actually the second worst, okay? The previous editions were all better. Now, how is that? They were still D&D, right? So how is that? How does that fit my title? Where we're going to talk about clones, okay? Because where D&D fell short, the older versions of D&D fell short, was in, well, frankly, organization and writing, okay? Gary Gygax was a genius, okay? I don't care what you say. Gary Gygax was a game design genius. Wasn't the best writer, and he wasn't a terribly organized man, and it all that showed in his work. Let's talk a little about clones. Okay, so the first edition of D&D was not first edition. Okay, the first edition of D&D is generally referred to as OD&D or original D&D or the white box or the wood box. There's a lot of different names. 0 edition, some people call it. Call it what you like. Okay, but the first edition of D&D basically was pamphlets, 3 small pamphlets, which would be designed to be played in conjunction with a medieval war game called Chainmail. And they could be played independently, and most of us who played back in the 70s did play it independently. Most of us did not use the chainmail rules, but you could, and you had a better campaign if you did, because domain play. But 0 edition, I'm not sure it translates terribly well to the modern audiences. I'm not sure most people, I'm a big fan of simple rules, but I think most people today would find those rules a little too simple. Little inconsistencies like daggers do the same amount of damage as footmen's flails, right? Or horsemen's flails for that matter. So that, I'm not sure that game would translate particularly well. Now, it's still a great game. It's, in my opinion, still better than 5th edition. Sorry, guys. I really just am not a fan of 5th edition. But if you want to give it a try, go ahead and buy it on eBay. It'll only cost you about $1,000 to get your hand on a copy. Or you could, buy PDF files like I did and make your own set. The supplements fixed a lot of the problems that I told you about, like the damage by weapon and that kind of thing. But it eventually, if you want to play the original game, you might not want to start out with the original game. You might want to start out with the original game and all the supplements. You might want to start out actually playing with the Holmes Blue Book, because the rules in the original 3 booklets were just atrociously written. And the Holmes Blue Book was later written as a start here. The Holmes Blue Book, okay, was later written as a starter set for the original Dungeons and Dragons game, the 0 edition, okay? A lot of people will tell you that this was our introduction to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Not really. I mean, Gary Gygax might have thought of it that way because it does use the new, at the time it was new, the alignment system, okay? But that's about the only element of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons that made it into this book. Before this, there were only 3 alignments. It was law, chaos, and neutrality. This brought in the whole good and evil concept. So the Holmes Blue Book is better written, better organized. It's just a better place to start. And once you've got your characters started in the Holmes Blue Book, then you can move on to original Dungeons and Dragons. But here's the problem. It's expensive and it's a lot of work to get. It's a lot easier to use clones. Okay? So, if you want to use clones, the game you're looking for is Swords and Wizardry. This is a really good adaptation of the original D&D rules. Or if you'd rather start with Blueholme, okay, this is also a good clone. This actually picks up where the Holmes Blue Book left off. They're both excellent. So if you want looking for an OD&D experience, forego the books. They're not worth the amount of money you're going to pay. I made them because they have a very special meaning in my heart. So I have a homemade 0 edition set with a lot of other stuff that I made myself for myself. But if what you're looking for is the experience of the first game, the very first version of D&D, I'm not going to say first edition because it's literally 0 edition, but the pamphlets, the white box, then Swords and Wizardry is probably the best place to start. Now, again, I'm not sure that particular game is going to translate particularly well to new audiences. If you want to play classic D&D using a rule set like, like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Okay? This game was written after the original rules had been on the market for a while. I think the first of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books to be published was the Monster Manual in 1977. I think that because when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons in 1978, it was the only book we could get our hands on. So we used that in conjunction with the little pamphlets. Then after the Monster Manual was published, the Player's Handbook came out. It took us a little while to get our hands on a copy. But after the Player's Handbook came the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then that's kind of the core rules for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now, if you want to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, there's a problem, and that is that Gary Gygax wrote it. And for all my love for Gary Gygax, and I got to tell you, I'm one of those total dorkulons who enjoys reading the high Gygaxian prose of the Dungeon Master's Guide. In fact, I'm kind of a pompous ass where role-playing games are concerned, especially Dungeons and Dragons. As far as I'm concerned, if you have never read Gary Gygax's original first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, you're not a real DM. Okay, you're just not. You have no understanding of the history of the art. You have no understanding of the craft. You're not there. You're not the real thing. Okay, I realize that's going to piss a lot of people off because there's a kind of a movement now amongst new D&D that rule books, you don't have to read the rule books. Yeah, you kind of do. If you want to be a really good dungeon master, if you want to be a great dungeon master, you kind of have to know the rules. But this is more of a historical academic exercise. It's muddling through the high Gygaxian of the original Dungeon Master's Guide, because it stands to this day as one of the best DMGs. No, not one. It is the best DMG ever written. No doubt about it. The charts, the tables, the suggested reading list. I mean, it's just perfect. Okay. But you're not, I'm not necessarily recommending first edition Dungeons and Dragons as the way to go if what you're looking to do is actually run a game with a modern audience. If what you're looking to do is to run a game with a modern audience, what you want is to clone. You've all seen me hold this book up many times before. This is OSRIC, okay, the Old School Reference Index Compendium. It was never intended to be a rule set. Okay, I got a whole video about that too. I'll throw one of those cards up at the end too. OSRIC was intended to be kind of a reference book for people who wanted to write Dungeons and Dragons content, but were afraid that if they used the original Dungeons and Dragons books as a reference, they'd get sued by TSR. TSR had its own issues with litigation. So you would make your module, you would say OSRIC, and Wizards of the Coast actually tried to hit them with a takedown notice too. So we would write our modules and we would say that they were compatible with OSRIC instead of saying they were compatible with D&D, and everybody knew what that meant. And they actually started a little cottage industry of modules. Okay, very old school. You can see the cover art. It just doesn't get a whole lot more old school than that. Okay, so that's OSRIC. If you want to play first edition D&D, that's the clone you're looking for. If what you're looking for is something a little bit more like the old basic and expert set, most of you probably do remember these. Okay, These came out shortly after, I think the early 80s. These came out, 81 maybe. This was the follow-up to the original starter set, the Holmes Blue Book that I showed you. The basic book came out next, and it was followed immediately with the expert rule book. Okay. There's also a companion rule book. When most people talk about these books these days, they talk about BX, Basic Expert, these two books. Okay. I'm not sure that's really fair. There's also the companion, which I find a necessary part. If you're going to play the companion, I find if you're going to play Basic Expert, I find the companion is necessary because I am a big fan of domain level play, and the companion makes domain level play possible in Basic Expert. Okay? All the versions of D&D that I have any admiration for include a good, not something slapped together like 5th edition, a good mass combat system. So for original D&D, that would be chainmail. For advanced D&D, it would be battle system. For I think it's called the War Forge, something like that. There's a mass combat system in the BBX companion. If you don't have a mass combat system, I'm not going to take your game seriously. I'm sorry, but the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, right? Big battles are intrinsic to the genre, and if I can't support them in your game, I'm not going to play your game. Okay? So you do want to get your hands on the companion. And they also produced, and this is one of my favorite bedtime books. Like, this is the one I drive my wife nuts. If I can't sleep, I'm up reading. This is the one. Okay? This is the Rules Compendium. This is the Basic Expert Companion, plus the Basic Expert Companion Master. The Immortal rules aren't in here, okay, but all the rest of them are. Plus a lot of material from the Gazetteers. The world of Mystara was the officially supported setting for the BX system, and it had lots of Gazetteers, and each Gazetteer gave new kind of rules, and they kind of over time started to conflict with each other. So one of the reasons they did the Rules Encyclopedia was because it gave them a chance to take all those conflicting rules and meld them back together, stitch them back together in a way that it was more consistent. Okay, so this is actually a great buy. And by the way, you can get this on Drive-Thru RPG. But again, we're dealing with expense. Okay, if you want to play this version of the game, you can get Basic Fantasy free download. Okay, this is a free game. It's a presentation of the BX rules. It is a beautifully written system, better organized and better written than anything TSR did, and hands down better than anything WotC's ever done. So Basic Fantasy is available free on their Basic Fantasy site. And there's a lot of supplements and modules you can get for Basic Fantasy. And those are also available free, okay, on their Basic Fantasy site. If you want to buy the books, then you can get these books at cost. Okay? Now, down the road, for domain level play, you're still going to probably want to get your hands on the companion set because it's completely compatible with Basic Fantasy. But to my knowledge, they have not yet put together a mass combat system for Basic Fantasy. But the guy who produces this, he does it for love of the game. He's not trying to make a killing on it. And to as proof, okay, he sells these on Amazon, these printed versions on Amazon at cost. They're print on demand and they're at cost. This is about $6. This whole book, about $6. I have a whole collection of Basic Fantasy stuff, and I use it instead of the official Basic and Expert editions of the game, simply because it's my old books are so fragile and old and broken that I don't put them on the table anymore. I use the Basic Fantasy now. I use OSRIC now. I don't put my good books out on the table. Now, if you want to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons using the original rules, you still can. Okay, the original Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, and the supplement Unearthed Arcana are all available as print on demand from DriveThruRPG. Grab them if you want a copy for historical reasons, but I think you'll be much happier if what you're looking to do is actually run a game. I think you'll be much happier just getting your hands on a copy of OSRIC. It's all in one book. It's just a better system. I'll put a link down below to my OSRIC Player's Handbook because I find it's helpful to have a few sections, like a few books on the table just for the players that don't have certain sections in it. There's certain sections that only the Dungeon Master should have access to, monster listings, stuff like that. But all the class, race, spells, all that stuff is in my little Player's Handbook. So if you want to take a look down below there, you can get a link to that, print that up. It's a PDF. So that's all D&D. That's better than D&D. But it's all basically still old D&D. Let's talk a little bit about D&D that's better than D&D, but they're not allowed to say D&D on the cover. Because let's face it, the D&D, it's more than a brand. You know, the Wizards of the Coast is going to have a fucking cow at some point in time because the word has been, to a certain degree, genericized. Okay? And because it's a game, right? Because they can't copyright the rules of the game. They can't patent the rules of the game. They'd love to, believe me. They would love to, but they can't. All these clones are every bit as much D&D as anything Wizards of the Coast has ever published. But you know what else is every bit as much D&D as anything else that Wizards of the Coast has ever published? And that would be Castles and Crusades. When you read Castles and Crusades, if you're an old grognard like me, it's going to have a very familiar feel. Better written, better organized, modern rule set, ascending armor class, that kind of thing. This is the game that should have been 3rd edition. And it has some similarities to 3rd edition. You'll also notice some similarities in style. When Gary Gygax left TSR, one of the many projects he took afterwards was consulting on the development of Castles and Crusades. In fact, the name Castles and Crusades is a homage to Gary Gygax's old wargaming club, which was called the Castles and Crusades Society. So if you're looking for D&D that's better than D&D, but isn't a retro clone, Castles and Crusades is the name of the game. Okay, it's got all the traditional D&D races. It's got all of the traditional D&D classes and a few others. And it's, it's great. Okay. Now, I do want to throw an honorable mention in here. That's pretty much everything I was planning to say, but I do want to throw an honorable mention in here. There's a lot of great old school Renaissance games, which I consider D&D. Just to throw a few out. Dungeon Crawl Classics. My favorite. The best. Honorable mention number 1. Old School Essentials. A little tricky sometimes getting your hands on it. It's a little pricier than most of the clones I've been talking about. But it's a great clone of the old Dungeons and Dragons. It's more Dungeons and Dragons than Dungeons and Dragons. In every possible sense of the word, better written, better organized. It can emulate both the BX rules and the advanced D&D rules, plus it includes a bunch of new, more kind of modern races. It supports ascending and descending armor class, depending on your preferred style of play. Old School Essentials. Great game. In fact, I have a homemade set of that as well. So, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So again, if you would like to give a try to a good old-fashioned, old-school Dungeons & Dragons, I do have a 2nd edition Advanced D&D campaign going. There's a sign up down below. Go ahead and sign. Got 1 seat left. Yeah, so I hope I see you. If I don't see you if I don't see you at the game, I will definitely see you next time I make a video. Okay? So, thanks for your time. Time is precious, and you give me your time, and I love you for that. Peace.